We have two fellows who have joined us from the Saskatchewan School Boards Association Public Section. I'd like to first introduce Bert DeGoyer, President. And Larry Huber, Executive Director. I'm also pleased this morning to welcome two colleagues from the Alberta Education Facilities Administrators Association. We have Alan Klepper, Executive Director, and Marvin Bushy, President. Welcome. And it's great to see some of our partners here early this morning. Pleased again this morning to welcome our two instructional leaders. To some of us, friendly faces, and of course to our new trustees, you're in for a treat. These two fine gentlemen worked with us in Red Deer this past June at our spring assembly. Dr. Fred Renihan has enjoyed a varied and challenging career in the world of education. He was a teacher, principal, director of education, executive director of curriculum and instruction, and assistant deputy minister during a 26-year term in the province of Saskatchewan. He was appointed as a dean, faculty of education at Brandon University in Manitoba in 1992, and CEO, superintendent of the Surrey School District, BC, from 1995 to 2005. From 2005, he has taught the graduate program in educational leadership at Simon Fraser University. Fred is frequently called to consult with educational policymakers and to speak on matters related to educational reform, school and school district leadership, change management, and educational governance. He has received awards for distinguished service in each of the provinces in which he served. He has written and presented widely in the areas of educational reform, often with his brother Patrick. He lives in South Surrey with his wife Marianne. They have two grown children, Sean and Kathleen, who both live and work in Vancouver. Dr. Pat Renihan is currently professor and director of the Saskatchewan Educational Leadership Unit, having served as head of the Department of Educational Administration at the university for the previous 10 years. He studied at the University of London in the UK and at the University of Saskatchewan prior to completing his PhD in 1977 at the University of Alberta. Pat's teaching areas are organizational theory, school renewal, school instruction, research methods. He writes and researches in the areas of school effectiveness, instructional supervision, parental engagement, leadership, and school principalship, and has presented and consulted on related topics with groups of educators and policymakers in North America, New Zealand, China, and in Europe. He has enjoyed various teaching and administrative capacities in the education system, and for 9 years served as a school trustee. Please join me in a very warm welcome this morning for our fabulous duo, the doctors, Fred and Pat.
That's great. That was lovely. Can we give her a little? That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a big lie about Fred, but all mine was good. Well, we've had a ball at Red Deer. It was just great, and we're having a ball here actually the last couple of days. We've been kind of in and out, wandering around. Red Deer was a bit of an issue for us because we spent a lot of our time in a place called Billy Bob's. Red Deer. If you know, I haven't been to Billy Bob's, it's quite the experience. We were there in a supervisory capacity. But very enjoyable. Just a catch-up since the last time we saw. Hands up those who are newly elected. Brilliant, because we're using all the same overheads that we did the last time around. And Fred was saying, no, you can't repeat the same thing. So I said, we can, they're all new. You know, a whole bunch. Hands up the used trustees. So it's kind of 50-50. It's good. Since last time, I had become a grandfather just before we met. And now Ronan is 7 months old, going on 7 months. And as a grandparent, you know, you kind of fawn over your kids, your grandkids. He's reading at a grade 4 level. He's reciting poetry. He's just mastered The Lady of Shalott. Good. But anyway, we got a picture of him later on where we'll kind of show him. Just great. He's coming along in leaps and bounds.
Now, before we go any further, somebody has lost a barrette.
Oh, it's Dick. That's Dick. Did you lose a barrette? No.
Is that yours?
Oh, yeah.
It's lovely. I was just saying to people, it goes with my eyes. All the red parts. So we're really happy to be here. And Pat will now talk a little bit about what we're going to do today.
Yeah.
All right?
We're going to recite poetry.
We'll do some
of
that.
Of course, we're from Ireland, Fred and myself, a place called Limerick in the west of Ireland. Hands up those who are Irish in the group. You have passed this class already. And what's the two types of people? Those who are Irish and those who wish they were Irish.
How many people know what a limerick is?
Oh, there you go. It's probably the finest poetic form known to mankind. And we'll start with the limerick. This is a used limerick as well, and they're all very clean, so it's no issues. And this one goes as follows. There once was a poet from Iran whose lines they never could scan. When they said that the swing never went with the thing, he said, well, generally what I try to do when I write poetry like this is to try my very, very best to get as many words in the last line as I possibly can. Yeah.
My favorite goes like this. There was a young man from Bengal who went to a fancy dress ball. He said he would risk it and go as a biscuit, but a dog ate him up in the hall.
So there it
is. They love that in grade 3.
Sometime around 3 o'clock this afternoon, we'll wind up. But, you know, this all reminds us of the 3 favorite lies of administrators. Number 1, things were different. I've got a few brief comments to make. Number 2, things were different when I went to school. And number 3, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And so today, we're dealing with policy, and our main objectives are, this is every time, it happens every time we get new management.
This is probably what some of the senior administration are thinking now that they've got new trustees.
So our goals, to increase our understanding of the current environment for board governance, to develop an appreciation for the qualities of good governance and good trusteeship. And we want to deal with these broader issues, to examine perspectives on policy as a framework for board action. And finally, to provide a framework for the work of boards in initiating and implementing change. And we want to talk about change and policy frameworks in a broader sense, but have you reflect at least 4 times during the course of the day in your discussion groups around how these relate to the work that you're doing within your own contexts. And of course, within the context, of course, is the organizational chart. This is chapter 1, as I indicated to you last June, of Fred's dissertation. That's it. Actually, Fred's dissertation won the Canadian Educational Administration Association Award for the best dissertation when he wrote it. Yeah. And he's as a matter of fact, when his external examiner came out of the room after he defended his oral, I wasn't allowed in there, but I said to him, how was Fred's dissertation? He said, it was great. I said, how was my chapter 2? Kind of looked at me for a minute. He was kind of half believing me. That's how we work. This is
Buffalo Trail.
And then it depends on who you ask. That's the teacher's perception organizational chart. And this is the principal's perception organizational chart. This is the feminist organizational chart. The Irish organizational chart. You see, it depends on who you ask. And this is the Department of Education organizational chart. This is the government of Alberta.
That's the Saskatchewan Department of Education organizational chart, yeah.
Just pretend we're not here, Ms. Robinson. This is the team.
Teacher evaluation team.
And so, what is good governance?
All right, so
What is governance?
what is it? It's rule policy making, it's policy application, and rule in policy adjudication. It's choosing among alternatives, ensuring fair representation and democracy in policy making.
It is establishing culture and climate. And what is the environment for policy making and governance? And in our roles, how are we interacting and relating with the different individuals and the different stakeholder groups we're working with? Later on, Fred and I want to talk about engaged governance and the need and the increasing need to work with the partners that we have in our various constituencies and work effectively. And providing, through general oversight, acceptable quality of service. Quality is job one.
And finally, it's taking responsibility for results. So we're talking about two things today. We're going to talk about what is governance. And we're then going to talk about how governance is enacted through the policy-making process. A couple of things that I think we want to make clear at the beginning. When we're talking, we have a bias, as all good educators and governors have, toward a policy-making orientation to trusteeship through governing bodies. But we also are very much interested in making sure that everybody understands that governance is very particularistic in terms of context, and that not all boards are the same, and that their circumstances are not the same, so that there has to be some kind of flexibility and leeway in how we understand how we're going to govern, right?
And so when you think about context, think of your own context, your own environment. And a fellow by the name of Carl Week, and some of you are familiar with this, he's an organizational theorist, but he writes about educational organizations with this following metaphor. There's schooling as soccer. And he says, imagine that you're either the referee, the coach, the player, or a coach, or a player or a spectator at an unconventional soccer match. He says the field for the game is round. There are several goals scattered haphazardly around a circular field. People can enter or leave the game whenever they want to. They can throw as many balls in as whenever they want to. They can say, that's my goal, whenever they want to, as many times as they want to, for as many goals as they want to. And the whole game takes place on a sloped field, and the game is played as if it makes sense.
And he says, if you now substitute in that example principles for referees, teachers for coaches, students for players, and parents for spectators, and schooling for soccer, you have an equally unconventional depiction of our current educational system, like a crazy soccer game.
And based on that whole notion that the school system and the school organization is a loosely coupled system. It's ill-defined, the goals are ill-defined.
And this is very important because when we look at schools and school boards, they're not working with unitary goals, a uniform unitary goal. It's not like Chrysler or McDonald's. School boards have to work with multiple and competing and contradictory goals.
And in sub-environments that themselves are complex, that are uncertain, and participation is uncertain. People can enter or leave the game whenever they want to. That's a beautiful sound. Can you sing along with that, Fred?
I can.
Good. And there's a wide ambiguity and added accountability. And on top of it, added accountability. And the issues related to accountability are alive and well everywhere. And it is an issue. In one of the most recent reports, Canada-wide, of educational governance, and actually recently out of a 2013 document, that was one of the biggest issues that trustees were seeing across the country. And that notion of uncertain accountability and uncertain centralization, decentralization, and the questionable will on the part of government to let go of the reins and to devolve decision-making and control. So with that in mind, looking at the basic trends that are influencing education currently, those debates, and Fred and I would just pose the question to, what are your debates? What are the issues that are confronting your boards? In a general sense, and standing back and looking at the big picture, that notion of lay control versus professional control of education. And where's the balance, and where's the appropriate balance? And when we talk governance, and we talk effective governance and policy, where does that where is given the context within which we're working in our different situations, different environments, what is that balance? And then secondly, related to it, the centralization, decentralization debate, and standardization as opposed to diversity. And more in our context, the populations are changing in many contexts. And this is the same throughout the country.
How much of this is beginning to look like what you're going to be dealing with as boards in Alberta? There's new conceptions of teaching and learning. And we know that every time there's a change in government, there's also a change in the drive for new ideas, because at least in all the ones I've been associated with, new ministers of education and new premiers don't want to have anything to do with the old agenda for education. So it keeps changing. Every time there's a change in, not just a change in government, but a change certainly in whatever party is in charge.
And with our new populations, issues of funding prospects, the University of Saskatchewan, like many other organizations throughout the country, actually internationally, the tightness of the financial situation is really palpable. And at our university, we're going through a very serious examination of every academic program within the university. And I happen to be a member of the task force that's looking at those programs. It's an interesting activity. The entire university examining every program with a view to its existence and subjecting them to...
And so they have to take $44 million out of the university to balance the budget. But please, don't ask Pat about that, because once you get him started, you can't shut him up.
It's exciting stuff. There are programs that I didn't even know existed in that outfit. And I've been
all of the people who are on that committee are ready to retire, because nobody would actually sign up for it if they had more than 5 years to go.
And elsewhere, retirement plans and retirement incentives to freshen up and to save money in terms of getting the expensive types to retire.
So there are growing inequalities, growing differences, performance gaps and effects, costs, accesses, and accountability is huge on everybody's policy portfolio. And there's, well, we're finding that there's an absence of bold new ideas and a demand for a supply of ideas and time lags within them.
That's an interesting point that, you know, nowadays I think creativity in governance is really needed more than ever before. How do we deal with these kinds of issues? And we can't deal with them with the same responses that we experienced ourselves as we were going through our schooling. And that's sometimes often a mistake to prepare today's kids with the same model that we experienced, you know, as in schooling. And then the education, the private good, and the public investment, and the inequalities, and how then do we organize, or do we prepare, and do we shape our policies for new and different populations? And those kinds of issues demand creativity. And then, of course, then the active policy areas. What are your policies? What is your policy agenda?
Later on, we're going to be asking you to look through this. Is this on? Yes. And to start looking in your own context about what kinds of things that we see out there that you're going to be dealing with. Accountability is huge, as I have said before, both in terms of school system accountability, teacher accountability, and administrator accountability. Success rates and achievement gaps, literacy, early learning, health promoting schools, school safety is really high on the radar now. And I think you talked about that yesterday. In one of your sessions.
And transportation, safety, special needs, job training, e-learning, succession planning, very big on the agenda everywhere. How do we get individuals to think in terms of applying for principalship, for example, among the teaching population? Where is the interest? Where are new principals coming from? And there are two elements associated with that. There's the motivational element. How motivated are teachers to think in those terms of moving into an administrative job? And secondly, have the background, the educative side, and knowing what the job entails and having that kind of background to be able to step into those kinds of roles. But that really demands long-term thinking and long-term planning. How are we preparing down the road and looking for and having an opportunity for the right people to come into the job? And this is also a response to uncertainty and fiscal difficulty. It says under here, Winston Central School District finds a solution to its overcrowded classrooms. And that's fine. That's creativity. That's the kind of response that we need. And so the context, Fred and I would now have you talk within your own groups here and your own boards around these broad ideas that we've been putting on the table. What trends do you believe have the greatest current significance for the work of your board currently? And secondly, what are the current policy files commanding the attention of your board right now? And how do those two questions go together? And then, are there other issues then that you want to talk about that are on task? Fred and I are coming around to supervise, and we will, as you're discussing. So there you go. We'll give you 15 minutes.
One of my principals sent me that when I was superintendent in Surrey. It was a career-limiting move.
Today's topic is public awareness.
All right.
And this is on the policy agenda, folks. This is an important part of the policy agenda. How do you get them interested? Get them out? How do you reach the periphery? And in schools, if, you know, the parental engagement, you've got parents that are coming out in, you know, and will be the same ones all the time. They're coming out. You don't have to worry about those. It's the ones that are not coming out. And what are they doing? And what is... oops, beg your pardon. Let's go away. And then good governance. Your own policy agendas. Fred, do you want to go around and sort of get somebody to just give it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Let me see now. Okay. Hey, how about this table?
I think Bernie would do a great job at that.
Bernie?
Excellent.
All right. Well, really what we want to know is there anything that resonated with this group from the active policy files? 1. 2, and the rest of you better listen up because it could be you next. And the second question is was there an issue that you discussed that wasn't on those policy files that has some kind of relevance to anything we're doing here, by the way?
Oh, we stayed totally on topic.
Good. I like...
We'll give you...
What are you doing?
He has to speak into this.
Oh, I see.
There you go.
By the way,
Thank you.
how many people so far have got these massive headaches from looking at Pat's shirt?
Hands up those who like my shirt.
And
I've had a migraine since I saw him this morning.
there's an A over here. She likes my tie as well.
Green for Irish.
Okay.
Say something.
After all that, no, we were talking about the shift from teaching to learning, where the school will shift away from a place where teachers run the program to the place where students come to learn, and it is far more their agenda, and we become facilitators for that knowledge. And I know we're in the situation where we've got very small high schools, and so we're having to do a lot of the teaching through video conferencing and those sorts of things.
Good.
And so we're having to shift to that.
Yeah.
If students don't come in expecting to learn, if you're in a video conferencing setting, you could probably ignore the learning.
Yeah.
And so if you want to get it, you can get it, and we're trying to facilitate that. One of the ways is by recording the lessons so that students can come back on their own time, review the lessons, those sorts of things.
Excellent.
Excellent. It's the student as an intentional learner, and that whole model. So different paradigms of teaching have a very significant impact in the long run on our own policy agendas and the policy files.
Okay. How about this table here?
Yeah, Fred. There's a...
Who's going to take this? Who's going to report out from this board? You want to stand up?
No,
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
We talked about very much the same thing, about how there's a shift. We talked about how there has to be some recognition in how teachers are taught now, and about curriculum design, redesign, and how there could be we're looking at a curriculum that will be in place for 48 months versus decades, which
Yes.
is what we've faced in the past.
Very good. Any other comments from any of the other groups?
There was a very interesting discussion with the group over here around the public good versus the private interest. And it's interesting over time, the ways in which that is changing. And it's having an impact. Individuals voting with their feet and taking care of the educational needs in a variety of different ways, including homeschooling. And it's that tension between the public good and are we addressing the public good? And we can't be everything to everybody, and that's the issue. As boards then, how do we address as best as we possibly can the public good? And how do we then work within those tensions? And maybe even part of the lobbying that we do as boards is related to that, individuals and the support that is available to boards where you are in very difficult situations where individuals are taking other options in relation to accessing education. And how do you sit in relation to that? And it's a very big, broader piece in terms of the policy agenda, but it's a critical one. And so moving on from here and looking at the notion of good governance, then what are we talking about? What issues relate to good governance? Looking at it effectively, how do we work as boards? And throughout all of this, Fred and I are going to get into some models a little bit later on related to policy and to change. And we just want to put the one caveat on all of this material, and that it's so contextual. Your own context really needs to be looked at in relation, and this material needs to be looked at in terms of the cut and thrust of your own contexts. Where are you? What is the nature of your board? And how is it influencing these ideas? But when we're talking good governance, in that very broad, general, big picture notion, participation, informed and organized participation. And there's a fellow by the name of Bridges who talks about, when we're talking about participation, for example, parents, community groups, and so on, there's two questions we ask ourselves. Number one, it's two tests that we perform. Number one, the test of relevance. Is this issue relevant to the group in question? And secondly, expertise. Do these individuals or these groups have the expertise to be able to participate? So is it mount to a hill of beans for the particular participants, or do they have the expertise in order to participate?
When we're looking at conductive participation, then what we would argue is that if the individuals we want to have participating have relevance, if it has high stakes for them, and if they have the expertise to be involved, they should always be involved. If they have no stake, they don't care, and even if they did care, they don't know, they should never be involved. I mean, why would you? But there are two gray areas in between, and it has a lot to do with lay people, parents who are outside of the system. Take it away.
We were listening to the wrong hat, I guess.
Yeah, no, you haven't got it. Turn it on. You're a disaster. You've got to turn it. That's it. Now you can talk.
It's a green light.
No, I think if I were you, I'd say, okay. I don't know. No, it's still not on, Fred. Yeah. I don't know. I'd get another one, but that's fine. I'll take over. Yeah. I will talk. Then the second down the line here, reliability and predictability and rule of law, the technical and managerial competence, the legal frameworks. And as boards, having that reading, what is happening across the country? What's happening nationally around these broad areas? and understanding what the changes are in relation to the legal system as it's impacting on our policy agenda. And what's that relationship? Effective governance, transparency, and we've used that word time and time again. It's almost overused. But to what extent are we clear, and do individuals know what we're doing? And that's part and parcel of this notion of engaged governance that we'll pick up again later on in this session. Individuals knowing what the game is, knowing how they can participate and how they can be involved. It's that notion of transparency all the way through. And then responsiveness, serving the interests of all stakeholders, which once again is more and more challenging. It's not the same anymore in many systems now, where we at one point in time had a very homogeneous population. More and more we've got a much more diverse population in terms of ability and culture and so on. And then the consensus orientation side and the equity and the inclusiveness and how do we deal with those matters. Equity and inclusiveness in terms of our professionals, our employees at all levels. And equity and inclusiveness in relation to the children and the families who are part and parcel of our system. And it's the responsiveness to those kinds of issues. And effectiveness and efficiency, the best use of the scarce resources. And that's part and parcel of the accountability. Last time around, Fred and I were differentiating between the internal and the external accountability side.
And that's very important because what we say is that internal accountability should always precede external accountability. So when you think about it that way, when you think about the accountability agenda, which in BC anyway, is imposed by the government,
Top down. Yeah.
and they say, this is what you will test, and you will test it on these days, regardless, so that we can have every teacher accountable. They rail at that because what the government is doing when they when they exact compliance, they're robbing teachers of their own professionalism. So they don't exert internal accountability.
And the same with your own roles within the trusteeship and the internal accountability that you have as individual boards. And that same thought applies, that it's much more powerful than externally imposed accountability. And that's the thought. So how are you accountable for yourselves and within your board and accountable to each other as boards?
And this whole business of, resources, I mean, the whole issue of, policy in a way is and governance is the allocation of scarce resources, of all resources, the allocation. And, at the highest levels of our government, we seem to have failed that. The Senate model doesn't work in schools.
And the same, well, you can have residences in different places. And then, of course, the two functions of the executive function on one hand and the governance function on the other. And it's that matter of relating the ability of those working in public office to understand the difference between the two. And what is the executive function? What are the roles of the various people who are employed by us to perform the duties and the responsibilities of the system?
Generally speaking, when we talk about these things, we say that, that trustees, school boards are charged with the job of making policy that will be predictable and fair and accountable. And that senior management are responsible for enacting that policy. And they're held accountable for the policy action. Now, some boards, and we'll talk about those later, start to become involved too much in running the trains. So instead of, making sure that they're laying the tracks.
And that the big picture is...
And that's the big difference. And
Yeah.
to make that distinction clear is the only way that we can
And
really
the other
operate.
distinction that we'd like to make is that related to the accountability and defining it. How is it defined? How are we defining it? What does it mean in terms of the responsibilities that individuals have that we hold accountable as trustees?
So what certainly our definition is that accountability is the degree to which individuals or groups can provide evidence demonstrating their effectiveness in meeting expected standards in specific areas of responsibility assigned or entrusted to them.
Assigned or entrusted to them.
And that is accountability.
Right.
Is that an echo in my thing?
No, that was me.
Or is it Pat? Yeah, all right.
And there's talks of governance. Fred loves poetry. He recites poetry. He was reciting poetry when he was 8 months.
This is a poem by
It's an Irish one.
William Butler Yeats.
And there's
It's a
some
lovely
of the best
poem.
poets in the world are from Ireland.
And he
There's
says
Sean
in this
O'Casey,
poem,
Leo Tolstoy. All of those. Oh, no, go
don't
ahead.
encourage him.
Okay.
This is really it's a love poem. It's a very tender one, and she says, "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with the golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and half light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams."
And you think to yourself, what's this got to do with governance? It's got everything to do with governance. I mean, you think of the children and that beautiful little tab that, where is it that you've got, Patty? Yeah, that little brooch, and children first, and it's there, but and we remember, but it's that thought, and it's that basic love for kids, and why are we in this job? And what is governance all about? It gets back down to that classroom level, what is happening in the teaching and learning and the instructional leadership that's taking place. And when we hold people accountable, we're holding them accountable for that very thought, that notion of what is first, what is our primary goal and purpose for being here. And so people are accountable when they've got jurisdiction to act. They are able to select a course of action from many alternatives. Otherwise, they can't be accountable. If they haven't got that ability, they're obliged to explain their actions or inactions to others.
They accept the consequences of their actions or inaction, and they can access sufficient resources to undertake action.
All you had to do was be in the council chamber in Toronto the other day.
Ooh.
And you saw the accountability in those debates alive and well. And what are we being accountable? Have we got jurisdiction to act? Yes, we have. We've got a very, very big moral purpose at stake here. And so it's those notions of resources. Can we do that? And then in terms of governance, how do we then ensure that some of these kinds of elements are in place for the people that we are holding accountable? Or are we possibly creating an environment where individuals will fail in that responsibility? And it's those questions that are really essentially policy questions that need looking at.
So,
yeah.
what is the
corpus.
definition of a board as a corporation? Because you're all corporations, in a way. So a corporation is a group of people authorized to act as an individual and recognized in law as a single entity. So that these are all kinds of, you know, throwbacks to, you know, how bureaucracy was, which has got a very bad name, was sort of established by Max Weber. But, you know, the whole idea that you're joined at the hip now as trustees, and you don't speak for the board. The board speaks as one.
And
This is a
hence the
concept
term-
that trustees in BC don't seem to get, because everything is so politicized, and they are elected on party lines. And that's the beginning of the sundering of relationships at the board table, sometimes.
So there it is, that word corpus, and you know this already, but this is just refreshing, looking at your context and what you're doing in relation to these basic elements. Corpus, it's an Irish word. It's important. And then the importance of board support. Focus on student achievement. And if you're focusing on students, you know, there's a lovely poem that I read to my daughter after Ronan was born. And it's just a lovely poem. I'll read it to you. It says, "Welcome to parenthood. No child of mine, I used to cry before the stork had fluttered by, would ever throw a temper fit, or claw, or bite, or scratch, or hit, or wear a diaper till he's 3, or sit for hours and watch TV, or dawdle till he makes me late, or leave his spinach on a plate, or act in short like other kids who make their parents flip their lids. But with the sound of baby feet come 40 million words to eat." It's beautiful. It's beautiful thought. And you could even see it with Colleen, you know, such a different thing altogether. She flew out here one time with the baby when he was really quite young, and he cried all the way on the plane. He was just distraught. And Colleen got off the plane, and we met her in Saskatoon, and she gave us a hug. And she said, "I don't want to make eye contact with anybody." It was just the same person that was probably saying, "Oh, that little brat has been, you know, crying all the way."
So what do effective boards do? Effective boards focus on student achievement. Student achievement is job one: high standards, rigorous curriculum, prepared teachers. They focus, in other words, on teaching and learning, job one.
Allocate resources to needs. Where are the needs? Budgets are viewed as tools to and that's an interesting kind of perception of then the budget. And watch return on investment. Use data to inform the policy making and priorities. There's a love affair with data internationally nowadays, and it starts with the schools, and they're big into it. But what's our role in relation to data? How do we use data in relation to our own performance?
Well, I think the big thing is, you know, at the end of the day, it isn't the school district or country with the most data that's going to win. It's those people who are very particular about the data they gather and who use that data to make informed decisions about change.
And then
yes,
finally...
we've got a question here.
Oh, yeah, good.
With respect to data, are we referring to just numerical data or anecdotal and all the other forms of data?
No. We're talking about what we call multiple measures, multiple ways of collecting data. And we're not just talking about what we call hard data and numbers, you know, because we can do a lot of stuff with numbers, you know, in terms of statistics.
And then engaging the communities that we serve. And how are we doing that? And that'll be chapter and verse dealt with as we move through. Your son could be a school trustee if he doesn't start applying himself.
This was in the province newspaper. My board weren't behaving very well, and they were fighting with each other, and they were doing some silly things. But not aided and abetted by me, I should tell you that. And this appeared in the paper, and I took it and put it on the trustees' lounge. And the chair of the board came to me and said, somebody put that thing from the province in the trustees' lounge. Can you believe that? I said, I can't. I said, that's disgraceful.
It's disgraceful.
Anyway, there we go.
Absolutely disgraced. And then the three broad areas of the knowledge, appreciations, and skills, effective trusteeship, and knowing government and system, vision and mission. What are we about? What are we here? Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Legal status of boards and trustees, role priorities, and with the school and community change. What's changing? How is our demographic changing? And that's related to that notion of data. What's working in the system? Appreciation for issues like diversity, demographic change, subjugation of the personal interest to the collective interest.
Now that's an interest. That's an interesting idea. You know, that sometimes we have to, you know, sort of tone down our own particular issue, or what is it? Grouse.
And sometimes we'll run for a board and we've got a bit of an axe to grind. And it's that whole process of taking away the axe, you know, it's then becoming part of that. You haven't got your own selfish agenda, it's that broader agenda. And I'm wondering sometimes if there isn't a need to sort of revisit that from time to time. When I ran for board, Fred was my manager, my publication or publicity manager. He was useless. I came in 7th out of 7 trustees every bloody time I ran. It was, and they called me landslide Renihan. I know, they laughed at me. But at the end of the day, there was a fellow by the name of Phil Hamill in our board. He was fabulous. He was a really beautiful, he was a great chairperson. And I was running against Phil Hamill. Fred thought that my slogan should be, have you had your fill of Hamill? That was not the way to go. So I just took the high road and still came in 7th out of 7, 3 times in a row. But it's those kinds of notions, those appreciations. And Phil used to say, hey, what are we about here? We're a community. We're a board. We're not individuals. We're corporate, we're a board. And it's that collectivity. And over time, you know, the axe does get taken away from you gently, and and that's the good side of it. And it won't always happen, but you know, with an effective board, it can.
But that mustn't be confused with sacrificing, you know, the values and ideals that you hold up there that are non-negotiable. Because that's there too. So the skills. You know, we become skilled in interpersonal communication, in listening, in goal setting, in interpreting data about school and system initiatives, and in developing effective relationships with school system populations.
Do you know, I think it's an ideal time to have a coffee break. A break. So, hands up those who don't want to listen to Fred anymore.
You idiot.
Well, now that's the kind of thing that we were arguing about, you know, working as a corporate, Fred. All right, it's 10 after. Can we reconvene at 10? In Ireland, it's 10:30. Okay. 10:30. Okay, we'll see you then. We'll come and get you.
The poem that is on the screen is, it's called Resisting, and it's by a guy called James Autry. And
he's related to Jean.
He's written a book which is called For Love and Profit. And he was, a high corporate executive, and he chucked all that in and started to write poetry. And a lot of it is around organizations and people who work in organizations and relationships that they have with their co-workers and boards and things like that. And I was reading this one, and it seemed to be, kind of contextually relevant to the environment that we find ourselves in sometimes. It's called Resisting. He says, "There are days when the old ways seem easier. To hell with consensus and community building and conflict resolution and gentle persuasion. It's time to kick some ass, turn some heads around, get some action, make this place move." He says it's time to stop asking questions and give some orders. Time to get things ready for inspection. It's an old urge, he says. The luxury of power, the first temptation of bosshood. And it comes like a bad temper on a day when someone won't accept the answer I gave and pushes again. Another 5-minute meeting that eats up an hour. Another to print out to prove a point not worth proving. Another ploy to protect someone's invisible turf. Another dance along that border between debate and defiance. I feel the anger flashing and fight what I really want to say. All that top sergeant stuff like shape up or ship out, or go tell it to the chaplain. He said, when I'm lucky, the thought of those words bouncing off the paneled walls makes me smile. When I'm not, I take a very deep breath.
It's really interesting that we've got that tendency every now and then to kind of go back to the ways that kind of worked for us. And it's interesting how that whole area of leadership, there's been so much written about leadership over the years, but not an awful lot of new material that's informing the area. But there are some interesting and useful things happening. We're dealing more and more in environments where distributed leadership is the norm, where teachers and teacher leadership is the norm. And it's providing that environment where individuals can exercise their judgment and their professional judgment. And it's creating that space for our employees at different levels to exercise their judgment. But it's very interesting. We did a study of the principalship for the Trustees Association in Saskatchewan a number of years back. And we held meetings with groups of trustees around the province. It was really very interesting. And I still remember this one group up in Meadow Lake, and they were all sitting around tables, and we were talking about the principalship and the needs in the principalship. And one group had their hand up and called me over, and they said, what are you doing at the university with principal preparation? We don't want people to have, create environments where everybody's involved, and we want somebody to run a tight ship. We want somebody to take control of the school and be the principal. And so you see, and then I tried to get into kind of discussion, which was a big mistake, around what we're doing and what kinds of new thinking there is out there around, and more recent thinking around leadership and how that is having an impact. And I might as well have been talking to a brick wall, because that was the model. That's what they wanted in terms of a principal, in terms of interviewing and so on for principalships. That's what they wanted. And so that changed. You've got different views from different segments and communities within our environment, within our systems, that have different views around that, around leadership. And that's, again, related to the topic of engaged governance. How do we engage the discussions around that? How do we enter into those discussions? And how do we ourselves view and look at those notions that are influencing very significantly our principles via that kind of poem that Fred read very powerful. And the tendency that we have to go back to the ways of running a tight ship, and how is that influencing? How are those theories and those discussions of leadership and governance influencing our roles as trustees and our understandings of the way in which our professionals are working in the schools? And so it's those kinds of issues that are critical.
So
and then, yeah.
We want to get then to talk a little bit about, the types of boards and by their orientation to action. So we have a number of both. Policy-making boards work from clearly enunciated policy. And they have the policies, they're clearly written, and there are a set of regulations associated with them that provide the impetus for action. And they're very careful to follow policies. My board, I think I was saying to you last time, we spent $3 million in defending a court case, around books. There were books that were presented to us for consideration as resources that had to do with alternative family models in kindergarten. So they were, sort of portrayed, gay, sort of models of family life. And so that caused a problem for the board. I said, we're not having those books. Saying, well, hold on a minute. We have policies governing how we look and adjudicate around what books come to the board and are authorized for use in schools. I said, no, we're not having those. This went to the Supreme Court. Then it came back. And the board were charged with reviewing these books again against your own policy, right? So they were found negligent because they did not follow their own policy. So we had to do it all over again. But that was $3 million later. So that was that kind of issue.
And some of those orientations, of course, are tested on the anvil of legal action or on the anvil of community reaction and community opinion. And where are we in terms of policy making? Or is that the predominant focus of this board? Is that the predominant style? As opposed to maintenance, caretaking? Things are cooking along quite nicely. And within our environment, is that the norm?
So that's driven by the need just to maintain the status quo. Everything is working okay, There is caretaking boards won't have anything to do very much with what we call meta policy. You know what meta policy is?
Policy on policy.
Yeah.
How are we going about making our policy? When do we rescind a policy? And within my board, I was there 9 years, we never rescinded a policy. Going back in and saying, is this working? And what is our policy in relation to rescinding policy? And it's those kinds of broader issues. How are we working as a policy-oriented board?
So some of your boards will have a process. You'll have a policy committee, that will look at policies. And what policies are, sort of anachronistic now, just that we need to get rid of. What new kinds of policies? So very, very often we run into situations, and you will too, that you have a matter that comes to the board, but you don't have a policy to deal with it. So, that is an alert that you should be looking at these kinds of issues. And getting to come to grips with it.
And then what is our relationship with the broad interest groups around our communities? We'll address this a little bit more later on. But that political action that's happening out there, those particular groups that are particularly politically very active, and they're active in terms of letting their needs and their interests be known. And then it's, how do we respond to that? How do we react to that? And what is our style in relation to
Third type of board that we have there, we call them faction-weary boards. You know, they're politically divisive. So they're spending all their time fighting with each other or fighting with the community. I used to have a parent, the parent advisory group, and they set themselves up, the parents, as really the official opposition to the board. You know, so that there was always fighting between the parents and the board. All right, don't get me started on it. And then, of course, we have custodial boards. They're hands-on in legislative and executive domains.
and yes, this is the Irish, hire an Irish plumber.
What I think the most important jobs that boards do is hiring the right people.
People, that's right. And then looking at that in terms of the relationship then with interest groups, Fred and I are fond of a poem. It's just called Point of View, and it's to do with the sort of blaming everybody else down the chain. And it starts as follows. The college professor says, "Such rawness is a shame, the high schools are to blame." The high school teacher says, "Good heavens, the boy is a fool. The fault lies in junior high school." The junior high school teacher says, "From such stupidity may I be spared. They sent him here so unprepared." And the elementary school teacher says, "This child can't even write his name. Well, so much for kindergarten fun and games." And the kindergarten teacher says, "Such lack of training never did I see. What kind of woman must the mother be?" And then the mother says, "Poor helpless child, he's not to blame. His father's folks are all the same." all the way down the line. And then by position in the organization, the advisory board. And looking at just boards in terms generally, not necessarily your own style here, but providing advice and counsel in relation to an operation. The work group board, with a mandate of limited complexity, a temporary kind of system, and the governing board. And then within that context, how do you see yourselves, you know, as a governing board? Most important kind of board, that of the ultimate corporate accountability, always positioned at the top of the organization. But it's the big picture thing. And then how do you work within that particular context? And you are, of course, working within a context. You're working within the legal context of what the provincial government and the Education Act has to say around the mandatory and the discretionary powers, you know, that you have as boards and trustees. And then looking at the nature of the organization itself.
Profit boards oversee business corporations engaged in trade to produce a return for stockholders operating in a market that is free. Such boards range from obligatory or figurehead to highly formalized and representational. I don't know what is happening in Alberta, but certainly in BC, there's been a big drive to, you know, sort of internationalize schools and universities. So many boards will have their own corporate arm that is for profit. So they'll have their own board at arm's length from the board.
And it's balancing that public good and private interest, and that we're not going to see the end of anytime soon. It's something that is more and more becoming part of our lives. And the technology and the different ways and means by which individuals can access education. And we're seeing it in a variety of different ways where individuals and groups are parceling out very seductive and very appealing processes and methods for education, and people buying into those approaches. And, but it's an alternative.
Yeah, so we've listed these kinds of boards because, as I said before, we like to think that, boards and educational policy making boards, but in the purest sense, that's not always kind of possible. And so that there are elements within all of these that we'll borrow from in order to make and help to make our work and decision-making effective and responsive and accountable.
And the governmental board providing the governing function of an organization, serving the public interest, and you are essentially a governmental board. You're serving that basic function, and open more and more to public scrutiny. And again, it's the accountability very largely and very significantly is the stakeholders, and it's the electorate.
I like that whole notion of, what you're there to do is to protect the public interest. And that is at the heart of what your mandate is.
And we love the idea of the 4-year, move to that 4-year. And the opportunity it gives for a group like this to do more in relation to your contribution and to advancing the cause of education and the processes and the innovativeness and the creativity, and to make a much more deliberate and effective impact. And that's the exciting part.
My advice to you is now, press the button that moves it on, because it's getting like Groundhog Day.
And there's his poem again. This is like Groundhog Day all over again. Yeah.
So we're here to...
now we've got your discussion.
Question. So what are some of the barriers faced by boards in their effort to reflect the qualities of good governance identified on whatever page you're on?
Yeah.
Are you all on the same page? Are we all on the same page?
Or the qualities of good governance that we've been just discussing. By the way, Fred and I have made a very, very good decision. Last night, we were sitting in a pub supervising, and we made a decision that we would give you all of our material. With all of our cartoons and our poems, because we're getting out of this business. And what we want to do is we're going to let them go at $30 a package. No. The good really went out of it very fast there, didn't it? But no, this is not true. We'll give Dick the package, and he will be responsible for getting it all out to you, free of charge. It might cost you a pint. How about that? So there's your question. You've got now 20 minutes in order to...
You understand the question?
Unpack that. Some of the barriers to the kind of the effective governance principles that we were discussing. Could reconvene. If I could have your attention. This is me with my family in the West Edmonton Mall. Actually, myself and Joan, my wife, went to Tianjin in China, and we went into the market. Phenomenal place. Bicycles all over the place, and a mass of humanity. It was just absolutely brilliant. It was great fun. But Joan had never had any trouble picking me out in the crowd. All the little short people and black hair. And here's this mop of white walking around. But really good. I never found Joan. She's 5 feet. 5'2", eyes of blue. Leadership. It's this whole notion of leadership and the basic questions. What does it take to be an effective leader? Good judgment. How do I develop good judgment? Experience. How do I get experience? Bad judgment. I guess it goes for everybody. It's not only school leaders, but it's teachers and it's trustees. It's school boards. And I think I was mentioning it to you as well. Fred's been through it. His term with his board is we're going to get killed. That's the bad experience. And with us, it was a family life program that we put in place. We thought in our innocence, it was no problem at all. We had this family life program. We thought it was up and running, ready to go. We had our meeting of electors. A normal meeting of our electors was 40 people. That was in Saskatoon. Most of them were teachers. But it was that kind of environment. I was understating it. But we went to our annual meeting of electors. And sure enough, as soon as we got into the hall, there was standing room only. It was just totally full. And it was the committee of concerned parents had got beat the bushes and got everybody out. People in wheelchairs, everybody came. And it was amazing. It was a lovely meeting. Because they started into us, and I said to Phil, "You're up, Phil." But it's that notion, your decision, your bad judgment, and it's all about leadership. You learn by your mistakes, and you learn to be transparent, and you learn to be more fulsome in your development of policy. And then this notion of near as I can tell, we're somewhere behind Mount Rushmore. It's leadership. Where are we? And the skill testing question, Fred. Which one is Jefferson? I don't know. All right. And let's debrief the barriers. What did you see as the major barriers, or what were coming to mind? The bluebirds. And any good teacher has names for groups, so this is the bluebirds. And the bright group.
I was going to start tweeting here. We felt that some of the barriers might be things like individual agendas.
Yeah.
And not necessarily always in a negative sense, but everybody has something they're bringing to the table.
Absolutely.
That they feel passionate about. Public, we feel sometimes we're dealing with a public that's more data-driven. Yes. And we need to start educating our public into more, generative governance, the aspect of what we're looking at. Yeah. Wandering in uncharted territory, it's important to stay focused on the vision.
Yes.
And we know that within our division, we spend a lot of time on our vision and mission. Change itself is sometimes just a barrier. And educating, informing, engaging the public, of course. Yeah. And one of the things too is staying the course, having confidence in the direction you're taking, and having confidence that your leadership is heading in the right direction.
Right, interesting. Do you know there's associated with that the change notion, and Fred and I are going to get into it chapter and verse later on, but the idea that with change, and when we're dealing with change, is it within our area of control, and what's outside our control, and even understanding that basic question, and then having some sort of meaningful change architecture, if you like what do we need to take care of? It's very interesting that vision is a very significant part of that. And, you know, I know people, and right through at the school level, that attitude toward vision as being just generally motherhood. And people don't buy into the notion, but it's buying into the value of vision, first of all, that's critical. And so it's, there's a lot there now, common kinds of barriers, and it's having people on the same page in relation to some of those kinds of things as well. And Tracy, what do you think? Well, they appointed you. You're the...
Hi. We spoke a little bit about governance versus the administrative role, and looking at the end versus the means, and that sometimes, well, females in particular have a tendency to be caught up in a process and how things should be done. So sometimes it's difficult to let go of that and to leave that to the administration. So it can be a barrier, and sometimes you have to help others along with that process. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. The sandpipers, those were. And over here we have the prairie chickens. There you go.
I just think sometimes your Alberta Ed has these initiatives that you require to handle, so you're almost bombarded with fiscal responsibility, so you don't have that time, and oftentimes it's driven to the administration, like our central office, but you know that if you're going to have governance, you're going to have requests from them, and you know how busy they are, so I think at times it stops you from bombarding them with more.
Yeah. And there's so much coming down the pike. And it's the same at the school level, the amount of things that are happening, and being aware ourselves of the amount of the expectations that are put on schools, and new initiatives, and governmental, from governmental levels, but also from ourselves as trustees. And it's the awareness then of what is happening. We had a very good discussion around the teacher as a professional, and it's that realization that that teachers are professionals and should be able to make their decision. That's basic to the definition of profession, the ability to make the call at that classroom level, and trusting. And I guess there's a big element of trust there in the fact that this will happen. I'm not saying that we back off entirely and abdicate, but it's creating, I guess, the space, and in our discussion, that was the term you were using, creating the space for individuals to be professionals. And there's some work around that Gouldner and company wrote in organizational theory, that bureaucracy, the more bureaucratized an organization is, the more immature our populations become. That more dependent on the rules and regulations that we continue to put in place, and the tendency for individuals to just back off and let you do the job. And that's the problem, is how do we create an environment where people can pick up the reins and go with it within that kind of general space that we provide. Oh, all right, coming down. I used to do cross-country running. Very badly. There you go.
We have one that some people probably wouldn't have on their list, and that is that often governance is hindered by perceptions and appearances that we have to put forward, so that the perceptions of the public often determine what we do, not necessarily what we should do.
Yeah, very interesting. The stereotypes that are out there.
All right, we'll have one more.
One more, and that, by the way, they were the vultures.
Oh, no.
That was a good parable. Then there's the eagles. Fred never did any cross-country running. Fred's going to get, he's going to get a knee replacement. I thought I'd tell him.
Just start talking. So this table had quite a discussion about transparency
And at what point is the board being transparent versus gathering information and having a discussion that if the public heard it, they might become very alarmed, but really we're just sort of brainstorming ideas. And later when it comes to board debate and discussion is a different thing.
Excellent. Yes. And what does that look like?
And I think boards struggle with that idea of transparency because we want to be transparent, but we don't also want to have the pitchforks and the torches arriving at the gate.
Excellent. And are we transparent also about process? It's not just merely the content itself, but it's the issue of process and transparency of how we do, how we operate, how we provide the opportunity for your complaint or your issue, and make that accordingly. And then the ambiguities around policy itself. Policy is a process, it's not an end product. And Fred and I, we like this sentiment about policy. It just that it's not a simple issue. It's not just an end product. Actual policies are capable of more than one interpretation. In an enterprise the size of education, policy is open to interpretation in all parts of the system. And your point is really well taken in that regard. Different individuals have different views of what policy is. And there are gaps and spaces and contradictions. Policy is filtered, it's interpreted, it's recontextualized, it is opposed, it's contested, it's resisted. Interpretations are consistently and constantly shifting. And interpretations reside in different power bases, and policies are loosely coupled within and between specific examples. And that's the issue. Depends on who you're talking to. And then trying to, we're policy-making boards. What is it that we're dealing with? And how do we then make that clear, make that transparent in relation to the kinds of issues that you're talking about?
Yeah, and that's really why I think boards really need to be vigilant about looking at their policies every now and again. It should be a matter of saying, okay, let's look at these policies, just so that there is clarity around the interpretation of the policy, even among trustees themselves, so that we can be effective in terms of the administration of that policy.
What Fred and I are interested in is Guba's model of policy, and policy in intent, policy in experience.
Yeah.
And the difference between the two.
And if you look at the model that you have, or on the screen, he says that there are three kinds of policy, or three elements in the life of the policy. The first is what we call policy and intention. We say that policy is the broad goals or aims that a board may want to achieve, and the intents of the policy are clearly enunciated. But he said then there is policy and implementation. What are the processes and means by which the policy is implemented? Because that becomes part of how the policy finds expression. And then there is the issue of how we evaluate the policy. In other words, Guba calls it policy in experience. So how does the policy hit the ground running? Is there any similarity between the intent and the experience? And how does that thread get drawn? And very often, I look at policies and there is very problematic relationship between the intent and the result or the experience.
And it's interesting that when you think about the major actors involved in a policy, that there will be a general transparency again. It's that idea of people that have having a good knowledge of what the policy is all about. And in your minds as trustees, I'm sure you've got, for example, with a supervisory policy, a teacher supervision and evaluation, taking that as an example, you'd imagine that the people that would influence most significantly are teachers. And a number of questions come to mind. Is this happening? Is the policy happening? Is that policy being translated into action in very clear terms? And that's an issue of policy, and it's an issue of meta-policy, but it's an issue of policy evaluation. And even to check with individual teachers, do you know the policy? Do you have an understanding of it? Or are they then just pure recipients who are just waiting for evaluation of some sort to occur? And is there, for new people coming into the system, for example, with beginning teachers, is there any process where they will develop an understanding of what those critical policies are that relate to their work as beginning teachers? And is that bringing them into the system and closing the gap between the policy in intention and the policy in experience?
So the other issue, of course, is how we adjudicate the effectiveness of the policy, and what tools or what kind of constructs do we use to evaluate the policy? And we want to talk about that a little later. But I can remember sitting down when I was a superintendent in Saskatchewan, in Swift Current, actually, and worked with a really fine board. They were just amazing trustees, like you guys. And they really worked hard at trying to develop a framework for the way they were going to do business. And we came up with a framework, that we pulled together, which was built around the duty of care. And there are 3 elements to the duty of care, broadly speaking. There is due diligence, that we're going to work hard to ensure that every child and every teacher and everybody in the system works hard and make sure that they're keeping their professionalism up front. The second is due process, that everybody gets a second chance, that we don't make any arbitrary or capricious decisions about students, about teachers or anybody, but we are very careful to look after the people who work and learn in the system. And the third element is due regard, which means that we are going to make sure that everybody in the system feels valued and safe, and that they're going to feel that they are making a contribution and that their contribution is valued. So that duty of care was the cornerstone on which we said, are we doing all those things within the vision that we've established for the district?
So how do we ensure that the policy and intent and policy and experience are aligned? And there's a lot of work in between. And then the issues of then policy alignment, the 2 activities both take place just before implementation that are often overlooked, and that's that notion of policy alignment. We're creating policy and we're developing policy we're not doing it in a vacuum, we're doing it within the broader context of our policy and our policies. And how does that align, that policy we're developing, align with what we've got in already?
Yeah. How does the new policy fit within the existing policy framework? Does it recognize and respect the same fundamental principles that every policy is built around? And is its treatment of stakeholders and the public consistent in terms of how we engage them and how we communicate with them and how we elevate and exalt their contribution?
And then back to the examples that Fred and I were using here, policy transfer. And how do we educate, how do we ensure then that individuals who are implementing the policy and experiencing the policy understand it and understand their roles within it? And
now, I don't know about Alberta, but I see, and I did when I worked in BC, outrageous gaps in terms of young policy, particularly that which came from the department. Because what they would do is they would develop a curriculum area or a program, and then they would send it out, shrink wrapped. And so, you know, people had to this would come to teachers. They didn't know what it was, but except that they were required to teach it. But this whole business of policy in process, or what we call policy and implementation, wasn't looked after. Where was the in-service? Where was the scaffolding and the support for these teachers? How did they implement the in-service and staff development programs that would enable them to do a good job of it? So there was, the policy and experience was kind of found expression this way. In some cases, the policy was used to elevate the chair that the teacher sat in. Or it was used to keep a window open. And sometimes it didn't get out of the shrink wrap. So what has to happen with the policy to ensure that it finds expression in experience that is defined in intent? Nothing. That wouldn't happen in Alberta, would it?
A similar issue is that, of course, that basic principle of subsidiarity, that decisions and that matters should be dealt with closest to the level at which they're carried out. And then that ability, how do we create, how do we ensure that we understand that there's certain issues or certain matters that we're dealing with as a board that do have responsibilities at lower levels, and that at the classroom level, at the school level, where do some of these kinds of decision areas belong? And it's basically understanding that. Yeah. The lowest, the least, and this is a governmental issue as well. It's where we're really looking at the broader provincial treatment of education. Where is the centralization as opposed to decentralization? But there's a philosophy there underlying that.
Now, just a little logistical matter. That is not in your
material
handout. There are several slides that aren't in this presentation that you were sent out, and that is because, well, we were refining this presentation in the last few days. And so we will have, as I said, the whole thing will be available to you afterwards.
And that's
I will wonder when I go home whether when you get it, it will elevate the chair for you, or whether you will read it. Or maybe you've got a window that needs to be kept open. All right. Good.
Before we get into engaged government, so we want you to go back to those two matters and have a look in terms of your own board, just very quickly around your tables here and prior to lunch. Where do you see your board working around this whole area of policy alignment and in the policies that you have and the policy agendas that you're currently dealing with? Where do you see those issues of alignment and policy transfer? So just talking about your own policies with those two kinds of criteria in mind. We'll give you 10 minutes on that. And the kinds of things that we should be thinking about when we are both the recipients of change and the drivers of change. And with those two kinds of perspectives in mind, there's a certain amount of feeling of loss of control when we're working within a centralized system. I had a great discussion with the guys down at the end. The the hawks, and really very good. There's other birds, of course, but we'll address those with the groups as we progress. There's one poem, Fred, that he's now wandering around. His machine is not working.
Well, I thought you were
there
going
we
to
go.
get some feedback from the groups.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Who,
sure.
you know, I got involved in a very enlivened discussion with one table. That was brilliant conversation.
No, I had a better one down there. It was really, really very good.
Who's going to take the mic from me from this table? Is it on?
Unfortunately. When we talked about policy alignment, we as a board in the last couple of years have really gotten into regular policy committee discussions, and we've really felt that's helped us constantly review our policies on a regular basis. We are looked at them. We look at them and we have them scheduled so they are reviewed regularly so we don't get policies that stagnate or no longer useful, and we update them so that they continue to be relevant to what is happening in our schools.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Excellent.
So you probably got rid of that policies that say, you know, you can only have skirts below your ankles and stuff like that, right? All that. And doing the wood stove up in the morning when you get there. Okay, very good. Did you want to talk? I don't want to talk. Does anybody at this table want to talk? Wait, no. Okay. Hey, everybody on task.
What we discussed here was the fact that in order to have alignment of policies, we need to have a long-term strategic plan, and that's something that we haven't developed for a while yet, and so it's something that we will be looking at very closely soon, so that we have the overarching parameters to set policy within.
Good. Well said. Who would like the mic now? Well, I'll take from anyone except the two who are running for president.
You're not getting the mic.
This is Sir Bernie.
We were really lucky in that we have just redrafted our policy handbook, and one of the guiding lights to our redrafting was our mission and vision statement. And virtually every policy that came up, that was what we were looking at. How did it align? And we were very happy with the process.
Very good. Excellent. Well done. Anybody feel like talking? Anybody would like the mic?
Oh, good. All right.
Hey, wait now. Somebody wants the mic down there.
Oh, somebody wants?
Give it to that gentleman
Yes.
in white.
It's on the way.
Where's Wes?
There you go, man.
Terry Riley from Medicine
He is in
Hat.
serious trouble.
Our process is perhaps complicated, but it avoids problems down the way, I believe. We established, 25, 30 years ago, into the collective agreement, a statement, I think it's Article 13, that both parties recognize the existence of a coordinating committee whose purpose it is to make the board aware of concerns to teachers. And that policy commitment, that committee meets every month to sit down. It has the president of the ATA local and two principals and one representative from the secondary school and one from the elementary school. It has representatives from the QP local, from the parent councils, and so on. They meet every month to review policies, and so it can look cumbersome, but when it's all said and done, everybody's had their input into the development of this policy, not only the broad, generalized statement, sometimes like what I call platitudinal statements, but They get down into the meat of how the specific guidelines as to how the policy will be administered, and then also the procedures that are established. So those are all discussed amongst all those different groups. With my God, I got a phone. I haven't been that thing hasn't worked for 3 days. So, shows you what happens when you get a new phone and you don't understand it. But anyway, that policy procedure then comes back to the board for approval and goes out to the QP people with the president, goes out to the ATA people with the president of the ATA. So when we're talking about the policy transfer process, they are doing most of that work by having been participants in it. And the parent councils have a representation. Everybody has representation on the committee that creates the policy. The board wants a new policy. The first thing we do, he said, we would like this to be a direction. Now you guys as a committee investigate it and come back with the specifics of it. So that's
really
our process.
Important point. Yes.
That's our process. It can appear a little cumbersome, but we do have a schedule for regular review of certain sections every year.
Right.
So anyway, it makes a fairly thick manual sometimes, and I have a colleague who suggests that perhaps is more appropriately done in a different way, but you know that he can be wrong occasionally. So, but most of the time Rick is pretty right. So I'll just leave that alone.
Thank you very much, Terry.
That's excellent. There's a number of the issue related to Terry's point is that notion of policy being an evergreen policy, and to assume that, for example, that we've involved parents in a policy development. That argument can go for so long we need to have the opportunity to apprise parents who tend to come and go, and teachers, and so on, as to the policy. To assume that because teachers were involved by committee or whatever within the policy, that we can assume over time that teachers have been involved. That begins to fade as soon as teachers come and go, and the same with parents.
Okay.
So what can we do in order to keep that evergreen?
You want the
I guess
microphone?
That's the point.
Well,
I can try to just speak loudly.
No, this is good. There. Dana.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that we do, and it's just one thing to help get the information out to our schools, our school councils, parents in general, and our administrators, is that we have what we call policy of the month. We're actually up to 2 policies per month now, but we have them on our webpage. They're distributed through our school councils, our administrators, and just trying to make sure that people are aware of it.
Excellent.
And have the opportunity for input. We welcome the opportunity for feedback from any of the people.
Okay.
Excellent.
So in short, what we would say is this. Find ways to institutionalize the development of policy in intent, policy in implementation, and policy naturally will fall to the right in experience. So we had and still have a policy advisory committee with all the usual suspects on it. And the board members and administrators and the QP and the teachers union and all of that. So same thing. And they meet regularly and their policies come through to the board.
So it's time for lunch. And as you're thinking of lunch, thinking of, there's a poem written by a fellow by the name of Edgar Guest. It used to be in a book, a poetry book, a school book, entitled A Book of Good Poems. And it's a poem that's simply entitled, It Couldn't Be Done. And it gets at that whole notion of empowerment and the need for empowerment and to empower ourselves, even when we're taking on a task related to these broad areas of governance and policy that sometimes we feel just it can't be done. And Edgar Guest writes as follows: somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with a bit of a grin on his face. If he worried he hit it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But he took off his coat, and he took off his hat, and the first thing we knew, he'd begun it. With a lift of his chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. So. Good old Edgar Guest. So, this morning, looking at governance, effective trusteeship, effective policy, and just moving along, Fred and I want to spend a wee bit of time talking about engaged governance and what that looks like. And there are three basic questions at stake here. How can public policy makers tap into community experience at all levels of the policy-making process? And that's all about engagement. The second question, how can citizens and communities move beyond lobbying as special interest groups to become more engaged as partners? And really, it's in a way depoliticizing the process, and you'll never completely get away from the politicking. But in terms of engagement, reaching out as partners and being involved in dialogue around issues that matter. And then thirdly, how can public policy processes help to build the capacities of all sectors to work together for more credible and inclusive policy making? And I guess that's the other term, inclusiveness. And what are the emerging stakeholders within our communities that haven't been traditionally involved before? And that's a real conundrum for schools. How do you reach the periphery? And we talked about that in June briefly with you, but who are those communities and segments of communities that are on the periphery, that are just almost seen and see themselves as outsiders, as edge walkers? And so how do we bring them? How do you, what kinds of strategies do we have to engage more meaningfully those groups that have traditionally not been significantly involved? And at the heart of that is community, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You know, we're very interested in that whole issue of communities as learning communities, as schools as learning communities, as school districts as learning communities, and the kind of style of leadership that is required to facilitate and engender and allow that to happen and become a cultural norm in the way in which we work with one another. One of the metaphors that I like, it's a prairie metaphor, and I think it's a kind of appropriate to the way in which we would want to act. It's a poem by a guy called Stromberg, and you know the story. He begins this way: one summer day, while lying in my yard on my back, with nothing but the distant drum of a distant train on some far-off track, I saw a sight which to this day I have never seen again. At about 5,000 feet, the lead goose suddenly veered out to the right. The formation kept growing wider until he found a place at the back of the line. They didn't even miss a beat. And that's how I found out how the goose can fly from way up north to way down south and back again. But that's something that he cannot do alone, you see. That's something he can only do in community. It's a wonderful thought. And people start with emotion and pride to think of themselves on the eagle side, solitary, self-sufficient, and strong. But we are what we are. That's something that we cannot choose. And although many would like to be seen as the eagle, I think that God made us more like the goose. A metaphor that resonates with the whole idea of how we kind of ought to work together. So, engage governments, levels of engagement.
And looking at then from delegating to informing, and just very basically here, delegating authority, partnering, collaborating, involving, consulting, and informing. And in June, we talked to you about some of the work of a fellow by the name of Sterner, when we're talking engagement and involvement, that it does involve acquainting, investing, committing, but starting with involving and acquainting and investing, and then into commitment.
So
we don't assume that commitment just exists.
So he talks about it's people sometimes imagine that other people should be committed.
No, they should be.
Oh no, I said that wrong. Well, actually, I know a whole lot of people that should be committed. One of them on my right now.
He's committed to his shirt. Anyway,
what Sterner is saying is that there's work involved in this. Andy Hargraves, who writes a lot about change and learning communities, says the whole business of becoming committed to something is a long process, and it has to do with time and energy expended and the sense of connection that we have to the importance of the work that we're doing. So it begins with that issue of acquainting, letting people know what it is that we're about and what we're doing, involving them, and then allowing them to become invested in what it is we are doing and we want to do. And it's only at that point that you can really have a commitment to anything. Right?
And it's understanding then is how do we work? How do we work with our communities? How do we work with parents? And what are the assumptions we use? And sometimes the language we use betrays perhaps a different orientation to engagement. When we talk about parental involvement. And that for many, that really signals involvement in our activities, not your activities. It's so more and more people are talking about engagement as a much more active process, and then looking at this, and that's why Fred and I are very fond of this particular model, looking at the involving and then the acquainting, investing, and through that process, only individuals really get to that level of commitment, and everybody, I suppose, has to be allowed to go through that process. And maybe that's something that we really need to think about when we're thinking of engaged governance. How can the communities that we're thinking about be involved and engaged via this kind of process, these sets of activities?
Yeah. So this model is not in your set of slides, but it will be.
It'll be in the new one.
Right, in the new set.
You're getting lots of promises. Yeah? And then the notion, Gersten and company suggests that an issue will appear and remain on the policy agenda when it meets any one of three criteria.
Right.
Or one of more of three criteria.
So the first then is scope. A significant number of people or communities are affected.
How broad is it? Yeah.
Sorry?
How broad is it? Is it widespread? Or is it a narrow sort of focus?
The second is intensity. That the magnitude of the impact is high. And time, it has been an issue over a long period.
And it's interesting, one of the groups was talking about time and timing. It's like that question, Fred, you know?
No, I don't know.
Ask me what my
No.
job is.
Forget that.
And why I'm not paid more.
Yeah, right, okay.
Ask me, Fred.
No,
Come
I
on,
won't.
go for it, Fred.
Go, no.
Ask me.
No.
Go on, Fred.
Okay,
I'll
okay.
ask you.
Hey?
I'll ask you.
Okay.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a comedian.
Why don't you...
Timing. He was
there was two questions I was going to ask him. What does he do for a living? And why doesn't he earn more money? Okay, Fred, what do you do for a living?
I'm not going to play this game anymore. You are making a mockery of a very serious issue.
What do you do? What do you do for a living?
No, go away.
Hands up those who really want him to answer this question. All right, Fred, are you ready? What do you want? What do you do for a living?
I'm a comedian.
Why don't you earn
Timing.
Now they got it.
All right.
That's good.
Now,
so it's time. Time is everything.
You press that button and let's get on with this show.
Okay. Then those basic principles.
So there is 5 principles of engaged governance. The first is legitimacy, that what we're doing is legitimate and it has a legitimacy of its own. And in other words, it's important. The voice in how do we get voice and whose voice? We're fond of saying very often that one of the voices that is muted in most of our schools is, in terms of important ideas, are the student voice. So how do you, in your district, find ways to give students voice? That's a very interesting question because they, in many ways, are, the child is father of the man in terms of the whole issue of technology, for example, and accessing information and all of those kinds of things. Their facility with networking and all of those kinds of things. How do we give them legitimacy and voice in our schools? That's just one example.
And the direction that follows from that is very closely related to it. Because you can have voice, but, kids in particular have to know how to use it. And time again, when we do school effectiveness reviews and we get out into schools with our leadership unit and we interview kids, you can tell what kind of schooling they're getting, what kind of maturity they've got, what kind of voice they've got. And some just can't give their opinion. And I think we think it's a curriculum issue that really we should be looking at getting kids used to giving their opinion, asking them questions instead of just feeding them. And it's that notion of what do you think of? What is your opinion about this? What do you think about that? And it's that skill that really should begin in early childhood, and rather than waiting for high school when often it's far too late.
The next one is performance. Have we got ways to measure the kind of activities and how we, in point of fact, give expression to the arenas in which we meet people? So how do you engage your publics?
And related to it, the fairness, and with what level of equanimity are we engaging people's voice? Are we listening to some people and some communities more than others? Are some of our communities more privileged by virtue of the fact that then we're giving them a greater voice, or that we're listening to them? And is it only the ones who are squealing that we're listening to? Is it the ones who make most noise? But and then related to it, of course, the legitimacy And those are very close. All of these are so closely intertwined in terms of engaging. And where are the people on the periphery? Again, it's that kind of notion of equity and fairness.
One of the writers around policy and his framework is Easton. And he suggests, that we have an arena, a policy arena, like a school district, and we have, outside of that, we're looking for inputs into the system. And we don't even have to look for inputs into the system because there are agitators out there that want input and that let you know. And then there are throughputs in terms of what within the arena, how do we get things done in policy terms? And then, of course, we have the outputs, which are, what we were talking about this morning.
And under this, it says, geez, not another mission statement. This is Moses coming down from the mountain. The other one that is, he's coming down from the mountain and he's standing there and he says, I've got good news and bad news. He says, the good news is I got him down to 10. And the bad news is adultery's still in. Oh, no, it's not fair.
Very bad man. You're a very bad man.
The other one in terms of policy is that he's got these tablets and he's saying to the crowd below, if you think these are heavy, you should see the regulations. Which is it's more of a trustee's story.
So if you could go back to that.
The previous one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because I'm anxious to know about, what we call the engagement arenas. How do you, as boards, how do you seek or engage your community? Over what issues do you engage your community? Are your processes institutionalized so that you have this very important matter of community engagement as an institutionalized norm? And how do you do it? Do you have town hall meetings? Do you have institutionalized committees? Or what? How do you do it?
There is.
The answer is not we don't do it at all. I hope.
Or what should. Bring an element of the should into play. We'll give you 18 and a half minutes on that one.
Yeah. Now, Pat.
As a group.
We have a question, first of all,
yes,
about
certainly.
that. Out loud.
Well, we do a number of things to engage our community. Our problem is the community won't engage. We have town hall meetings, and if we get, I'm going to say 40 would be like a huge crowd. We have school councils, of course, but we have a council of school councils. And if we get 15 people coming to that, that's a rarity. We have surveys that we conduct, and of course the province conducts surveys. Our problem is getting people to engage in those things. So if somebody's got some ideas of how you do that, we'd sure like to hear it.
Right. Are you running for office? Give me that mic.
Okay.
You gotta watch these guys. You gotta watch.
Bravo.
I think he probably feels set up now. Look, we wanted you to talk at your tables about this, how you do this.
We want within board, discussion. 18 and a half minutes. Under here it says, do you have a take your time getting well card for an algebra teacher? Those are all, that's where it's all about. It's the teaching, learning situation. It's kind of, I sense it's time for another limerick, you just sort of got to that point where you've kind of lunch has all settled in and you're now getting drowsy. There's this limerick, and it's a very moving limerick. Actually, it's a French immersion limerick. this one. So you've got to really listen carefully to it. It goes as follows. An Irishman in Nice named Pat Sweeney, for a bet, drank 4 quarts of martini. The local gendarme wired his wife in alarm. Nous regrettons, Pat Sweeney, a fini. So sad, really sad.
It's very, very sad.
Very sad.
Yeah, yeah.
Why Johnny can't read the video. These are very educational. And then the engagement side, and to wind that part up before the coffee break.
Yeah, no, wait.
Oh, do you
we
want
wanted some feedback. Feedback.
Okay.
I mean, you don't ask people to discuss something and then say, okay, you did it now.
Oh,
yeah, let's move on.
They're school boards.
Hey?
They can do that.
It's like your university class.
All right, where's the machine?
Do you know what the definition of a university professor is? That's someone who talks in someone else's sleep.
Idiot. As my dad used to say about Fred, he comes to his wit's end after an amazingly short journey. No, that's not true. It wasn't.
That was the most unkindest cut of all, wasn't it? Okay, so let's have some
well, you had to
feedback.
go my shirt.
I want to learn what kinds of community engagement things happen.
Just a couple of over here.
I think they were goofing off, that group, actually. Who wants the mic? Come on. This is... Failure is not an option. Are you trying to bail...
Give him a break.
You're trying to bail him out?
Yeah,
Oh, how sweet.
Good organization.
Remember that, Northern Lights. So, Kim Webster with Pembina Hills. Some of the things that we've been doing, of course, we have our stakeholders planning once a year where we invite in the whole community.
Good.
Yeah, basically the whole community and as well as staff. We also have done some where individual trustees will be aware of whatever little fairs are going on in their communities, and if there's not a parade, then they might set up a table. And an example of what we've done is, for a topic the one time was Then and Now, had a little typewriter and paper on one side and then the iPad on the other, and then it brought in kids who wanted to try out this cool typewriter and parents who wanted, the kids would show them how to use the iPad, and and then they would talk to the trustees. And what else did we say? Oh yeah, at our staff PD day, the trustees served soup to our staff so that could connect with them. Really? And we attend our school council meetings as well.
Very good.
Do you know, there's an element of creativity in these, and what kinds of what will work? What will get parents or groups coming out? And
all right, we've got another group.
Hello, Joanne from Grand Prairie Public. I just want to put out the question, are we measuring community engagement on quality or quantity? Because you can have 40 people that attend but have no idea what's going on, or you can have 10 really well-informed people.
Depth. Over here, Fred.
That's good. Thank you. Yeah, all right. Qualitative assessment. This group?
Yeah. Nancy. Oh, okay.
You're the robins. You're the robins. You're the bluebirds.
Yeah.
Nancy McClure, Wild Rose Public Schools. We, I think, are using some multi-layers of community engagement where we're using sort of the traditional town hall meetings and those types of things. We're really utilizing our school council meetings in an intentional way. Yes. We have we're able to, with a small town rural school division, able to have attendance from school trustees at every school council, and we make that very, very intentional, as I said, and we bring things back from those meetings. We ask them for information that we can take back as potential action items. Utilizing ThoughtStream, which is a great new, I would say new, but new to us anyway, a new, I guess, online tool that can be used with staff, community, et cetera, very user-friendly. There's additionally a lot of multi-layers of social media that we can be using. I'm not saying you need to use all of them, but you have to attract the audiences wherever they are. Yeah. That's critical, and I think that those are the things we're trying to do.
Good. Well said. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't see any other hands up.
Corner.
Way down there.
Aspen
I'm the guy
View.
with the bad knee, and I'm doing all the running up and down. I think.
I got new shoes, and they were hurting me, so I've dropped about 5 inches.
Have you ever had one of your keynote presenters wandering around in his stocking feet? Wow.
Dennis McNeil from Aspen View. One of the things that we did in the last term was reduced from 9 trustees down to 7. And in that process, we went out to our communities, first of all, sending out surveys and asking them, like, how many did you want to have, and that sort of thing, and took the information back, and then went back to the community again, and we talked to them about restructuring and then redoing the boundaries. And what we found was the first time we went to the communities, we got a handful in each of the communities that we went to. And then the next time we went out, we got even fewer. And then the third time we went around, basically in some of the communities, we didn't get anybody show up at all. And I don't know whether that was because there was a certain amount of apathy, or maybe we overdid it, I don't know. But one of the things that we're finding is that there's a couple of issues, I guess. Number one is maybe they're just happy with the way things are and don't want to bother coming out, or they just don't care. And I would prefer to think the first was true.
Yeah.
But a couple of other things we do. We have something called Aspen Views, where we have a communications person who we have all of our schools submit stuff to this particular person. They put this together, and then we send it out to as many people as we can. And so the next step in that process is to get the emails of our parents and our county councilors and so on, and other community members, and just start sending it out to them too, because we want to start celebrating those kinds of things. But it's probably the most difficult thing that we have to do is community engagement. And I really don't know what the answers are, but we do the best we can with the resources that we have. We try to put things in the newspaper. We try to put it on the radio. We do it through the parent advisory committees. And you know, it's an endless battle, but it's one worth fighting.
Good.
That's beautifully put, and that's an issue everywhere. And I guess the response is just continuing to do precisely that. And it's at the same at the school level. What do we need to do to get parents out? But it's communicating and just going that extra mile in a consistent way.
Okay.
When we're talking about then policy development and what you look for, the problem definition, the goals, the instruments, and within the context of community engagement, how do we make issues that we're appealing or of interest to the groups that we're working with? And those comments that you were making, the kinds of initiatives, the creative approaches that you're taking within your own context, are really, really interesting, and it's community relevant. And it's how do you just keep going, keep hammering away with those approaches. And it's thinking through, and that's where I think a lot of board action comes. It's in that kind of creative approaches.
Yeah.
And
so if we like to look at, what Carver has to say, he's the guru on, the policy, the policy making board. And he says there are several issues or principles. The first is keeping the trust in trusteeship. you know, and the trust is deeply implicated in your ability to demonstrate that you are keeping alive and well what is in the public interest.
And demonstrating over a period of time that it's trustworthy. And that comes with time. It comes with experience. It comes with the kind of communications that you're talking about.
Second,
and that's the visibility part.
Principle, the board speaks with one voice or not at all. Like when I got to Surrey first, it was like Babylon. I think it was just, you know, that's the way it was. It was interesting to hear that you talked about getting your board down to 7. We had a 7-member board, and we went along and say, well, Fred, we think we should have 9. We should go to 9 like Vancouver because, you know, we got a lot of work. And I'm saying, you can't be serious. I can't even manage 7. I have a hard time knowing where you are. They said, oh, well, they would come back to it again. But I think they're maybe up to 9 now because, you know, the system grew. I mean, there are 9,000 employees now. It's hard to fathom.
And the board has its rules and their regulations and their provincial regulations around quorum and around then the decision, when a decision is passed. And then it's abiding by it, regardless of one's stance.
Board decisions are predominantly policy-driven. I mean, the major decisions that the board makes are, you know, they emanate from the board policies. Policy formulations determined first by the board values prior to progressing to narrower ones. So the policy formulations are determined by, and you talked about that this morning, that you went back to looking at your vision and does the policies match, you know, the kind of vision and the values and the sentiments and aspirations that you have as a board.
And then the board role, define and delegate rather than react and ratify.
Yeah.
And it's
you don't want to be a rubber stamping board. You want to be an informed board that you are knowing and confident that any decision emanates from your policy and it is defensible, right? That's the way of it.
Active rather than passive. Ends determination is the pivotal duty of governance. And we did talk about ends and means, and it's ends oriented. The board control over staff is to limit, not prescribe.
Yeah. So are we clear about what that means? The board's control over staff is to limit, not to prescribe. So what Carver is saying here is that you have a responsibility for the decisions that the board makes. But you don't prescribe how that work is done. That's what you hire superintendents and assistant superintendents and principals and all of that for. And if you tell them continually how to do their work, you can't hold them accountable, really, because it's you who are doing it.
And those issues then explicitly design its own products. A board must forge a linkage with management that is both empowering and safe. And that relationship is critical. Who are those individuals who are working in those senior positions that really are dealing with the big picture to a certain extent? And that's what drags them into the role from all the research around what is it that motivates people into senior management. It's those kinds of big picture notions and the informed notions. But it's that safety within which they can, and that environment, that relationship with the board is really very critical. And that a creation of that environment where individuals are safe to create, to suggest, and maybe at times critique, you know, what we're doing. And then finally, the performance of the CEO must be monitored rigorously, but only against policy. And it's that continual, that ongoing assessment and evaluation of CEO performance as an arm of the board.
Two things that I think are important, and I always insisted with my board. I would insist that the board sit down every year and develop a list and a statement of what we want to accomplish in this year. It's our growth plan, our whatever you like to call it, the goals of the board. And we would not only do that in board session, but we would do it in kind of public forum. You know, here's what we're thinking about, here's the feedback that we want to go into the board assessment of board goals. I would develop mine. My assessment as CEO of what I wanted to do and what I would be accountable for in this year to achieve. And some of those would be kind of stretch goals. You know, you can't really, I'm fond of saying, you don't look at the job description of the principal or teacher or superintendent and say, well, were you doing your job? I mean, when you develop that job description, you develop to hire the superintendent. Then the superintendent has a set of, within the scope of that job, a set of objectives to achieve that the board want him to or her to achieve. And then you're evaluated against that. The other thing that I used to do is to set out for all of the principals a set of promises to keep. There was always 10, because I'm a good Catholic. Always 10. Hey? Yeah. Well, we used to say, well, there are two kinds of people, Cadillacs and pedestrians. We're Cadillacs. Anyway, we don't want to get into the Northern Ireland War again.
There's one broad piece of business that we still need to do. Coffee. No, and after coffee, we want to talk about change. And there is a preferred view. We want to talk about change architecture and how you deal with change within your own context. We want to put forward that change architecture map and talk it through. And so we want to present that to you when we return, and then have you kick that around in relation to your own grapplings with your own changes. So that's where we're headed. And we're done. I think it's coffee time.
Yes.
And if you just feel free to wander around and see. Are there things to see, Dick? Is there anything that they... Just the coffee. Have a great cup of coffee, and we'll see you in at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock Saskatchewan time. So on this slide there, this is really needs to be, you need to check this very closely. At the top, employees over 30 years of age, and at the bottom, employees under 30 years old. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Employees over 30 years old. Now, the skill testing question is, when's the best time to hold staff meetings? Wednesday is the day. That's your day for board meetings and staff meetings. Skill testing question. This is your midterm exam. This is University 1, folks. This is University 1, and this is your midterm. The question is, what is the saying under the... False. False. It says under this, if the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, fertilize your own side. So there. And the one at the bottom left is Fred. No, that's not. No, hey. We're talking change here very quickly. We'll run through this because we want to get to that change architecture notion. But the maintenance of the old system, the awareness, so the cycle and the stages of systemic change here, the awareness of a need for change, and when does that become apparent to us? You know, as a board, what do we need to do differently? And is it becoming quite, and do we decide when it's too late in a reactive way, or do we decide in a proactive way about change? And often it's brought about by some kind of crisis. And we say to ourselves, yeah, maybe we do need to change. And it happens all the time when a kid commits suicide, and we've seen a lot of that over the last few years. And the bullying and the cyberbullying and being able to then deal with that. But those kinds of issues, those broader safety issues, and transportation issues, and sometimes they will converge by, and at what time? When do we need to engage the discussion around anticipating and in the longer term, how do we bring about those kinds of things? Of new ways of doing things, yes. And transition then. Building, buy-in. And that's a huge issue with professionals in our schools. Buy-in, when we're then initiating a change, is there a buy-in from our respective communities, our professional communities, the communities of parents and families, and are they buying into it? How do we double-check that there's buy-in? And you know, sometimes and Fred and I have worked a lot with professional staffs, that you get a hint from a staff that people are interested and they're buying in, but you just can't go by the body language. That they might nod like heck, but as Michael Fullen says, teachers have a pocket veto on change. And they close their classroom doors and they carry on. But that's the kind of cynic in us will think about that. But how are you genuinely getting buy-in, and where are you getting that? What processes have you got in place in terms of then building that sort of level of commitment to a new process or a change or a different way of doing things, a new supervisory policy, and those types of things, and orientations from elsewhere, from government. And then the emergence of the new structure. And so really, when we're talking about systemic change, it's those kinds of elements that really we're thinking about. And there is such a thing. I think it's systemic change also within your own jurisdictions. And there are changes that are unique to your own board and your own context.
So, 8 mistakes in implementing change. These are things to look out for. Allowing too much complacency to take root in the system. You know, in other words, yeah, we just do things the same old way, and things start to catch up with you. What infrastructure or what processes are in place to allow you to take a bigger look at the system? People used to criticize us a lot, I think, for taking retreats away from the system. But how do you get a bigger view of things if you don't get away I'm talking about taking the time to get together free of the tyranny of the immediate and take a broader look at the system. What things do you have in place that will allow you to do that?
And then failing to create a sufficient powerful guiding coalition. And who are responsible? Who are the people that can help this, who can move it along? And then having those individuals involved. And what kind of representation have we got across our group? And are we, once again, disenfranchising anybody in relation to it, any of our communities? And it's getting that read of it, that intelligence, and what is it? What's our system look like? What kinds of coalition? Who do we need to kind of co-opt and involved, in this whole process?
And then underestimating the power of vision. I mean, we've all got mission statements, and we've got the visions. Sometimes we tend to leave those on the shelf instead of sort of dusting them off and saying, we need to keep this up front.
And Fred and I love that kind of notion that you've got around vision, and a number of you were commenting on that in terms of how you're addressing that within your own systems. And that's really, it's beautiful. So it's that notion of the evergreen vision, and you've got it there, and you're revisiting it consistently, and it's held in the forefront.
Yeah.
And then under-communicating the vision, permitting obstacles to block the new vision, failing to create opportunities for short-term wins. And when do we celebrate? There's an issue in it unto itself. When, as a board, do we celebrate successes related to some of those kinds of initiatives that we've got, and how public are those celebrations?
And neglecting to anchor changes firmly in the culture. Pat talked a little bit about, the chair of his board every now and again saying, look, what are we doing here? What are we about? What is it that we value again? Let's revisit it. That's powerful cultural norms that we have to bring out and talk about and celebrate.
And how do you do it with teachers? For example, as a case in point, but our general employees, the people who are part of our community, how do we celebrate their successes, and how do we communicate as a board? And we used to deal with that all the time. We ended up giving people pins. What the heck is a pin? I mean, they get pins for being around 25 years. But it's the notes, it's those kind of communications that we really love. And the board has got phenomenal power in that regard. To get a note from the board saying, hey, we really appreciate what you've been doing, around this area. That changes, that really empowers individuals. They come to work with a, really good motivation. They're empowered. They're seen as valued, and it doesn't take money. Just takes then that time.
It's the big issue of how we recognize performance, how we recognize contributions, how we just recognize and value people. These are important things that we kind of can let slide a bit. Do you find ways to institutionalize those things? Do you bring people to the board meetings to display their work, to tell what it is that they've been doing?
And then how do you embed the whole thing? How do you embed the change in the culture? And especially if it's a significant sort of structural change that you're bringing about, there's something you have to really give some thought to around the existing culture. And there's a lot of writers now, Fullen and company, are talking about unpacking the original, the existing culture, because there are things that we're doing that may get in the way of the change. So how do you unpack? And Brian Caldwell and company call it planned abandonment. In other words, we abandon, but there are things that we stop doing. What do we have to stop doing? And it's Fred and I worked with the directors at Leeds in Saskatchewan a number of years back, and we talked to them about, for example, working with principals groups. And a number of them said, this is a very difficult task, to get a group of principals together and to just pose the question to them, what do you stop doing as a principal? What do you need to stop doing?
Because they say,
consistently.
We're doing too much, we're doing too much. There's too much on our plate. Just everything is being poured out on us. I could say, okay, so what are you going to abandon? I agree with you, but if you were going to take it away, what can you not do that you're doing now? Well, guess what? I can't not do anything. I got to keep doing everything. Well, don't talk to me about this again then.
We don't want to hear the complaint anymore. And one director was saying that they got the principals group together, and they had flip charts, and they're trying to figure out, what is it we stopped doing? And they couldn't identify anything. They had blank flip charts at the end of the process. It's a very difficult thing to entertain. But for us, as a board, and when you're thinking of a change, what is it that has to be stopped in order to kind of then be successful in relation to moving this ahead or modified?
The last thing is declaring victory too soon. That's a very dangerous thing to be
Very
doing.
dangerous. Yeah. Napoleon found that. Yeah, they're all running away from Moscow.
No, that was Moscow.
And here, then, when we're talking change and change architecture, across the top of the diagram here, then, is the notions and those elements, those bricks, vision. And it's interesting.
We call these preconditions necessary for effective change. And this is taken from, adapted from a model by Ambrose, which he calls managing complex change. And so we have at the very top all the preconditions necessary for effective change in organizations. Vision, attainable objectives to be able to achieve the vision, skills, incentives, resources, an action plan, and a monitoring and evaluation of that plan. And if all of those cells are filled, then I think it's pretty well axiomatic that your change effort will be successful.
You've got it. Skills, incentives, resources, action plan, monitoring and evaluation. And then you remove vision. According to Ambrose, you've got confusion. Without attainable objectives, you've got disorientation.
Without skills, you have anxiety. In other words, you know, teachers, for example, who are given a curriculum, a new curriculum, and they haven't been taught how to use it, or how to develop it, or how to teach it. They are very anxious. We get to incentives. If there are no incentives, why should I do this? Why should I change? What's the incentive for teachers, research tells us, is that if the teacher feels that the change that they're about to enact is going to result in improved performance for their students, they'll do it.
They'll jump in.
They'll do it if they feel that they will learn better.
And without the incentives, you've got drift. Without the resources, and it's putting the resources in place. And what kinds of resources? Is it then the personnel resources, the financial resources? And it's that backup for all of those kinds of elements of training that might be needed in that area. But without that, you've got frustration. Without an action plan, you've got false starts.
And if you have no plan for monitoring and evaluating the change to take corrective action, you have discontinuity. So this is a model of change architecture that you can look at in terms of what it is that you're doing as a board, what you're doing in a department, as a Department of Education, in government, in schools, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that when teachers are frustrated, when administrators are frustrated, when trustees are frustrated, it's because these things aren't attended to.
And it was really interesting. And this all came home to me in spades when Fred had the experience in Manitoba as Dean of Education at Brandon University after he got fired from government in Regina.
I didn't get fired. I got an opportunity for a career change
that was
non-negotiable.
The government decided they were going to get rid of 17 civil servants, and Fred was up there, Associate Deputy Minister, and anyway, the rest is history.
The minister called me into her office and said, Fred, you and I don't appear to be on the same page. And I knew what was going down, so I said, "Ma'am, we're not even in the same book." Said, "You're fired, Fred."
You're out of here. You're out of here. But anyway, he was Dean of Education in Brandon, and the Minister of Education in Manitoba at the time had called a press conference to announce the new curriculum. Real curriculum reform, new curriculum had been designed. But it was the amazing statement that she came out with at the press conference. Everybody was there, and she stood up and she said, "All the work has been done. Everything is in place. We have got a new curriculum for Manitoba." And without any consideration, across the top here, everything applied. Oh, that was all blank. It was the implementation plan. It was the resources. And over a period of time, it became really clearly obvious that there was no chance. This thing never had a chance.
No buy-in.
And they had to. It was scrapped. It died. They held a wake for it. But that was, there was no resources, there was no opportunity for skill development around it. And Fred and I had another slide that we were dealing with in last June, and it was that notion of the impulse for rejection. That whenever a change comes about, all of us have that basic natural instinct to reject. Now, for some of us, we get over that faster than for others. But it's that basic impulse for rejection that wasn't really allowed. And then the basic assumption that this curriculum was developed, but it was developed by a committee. And therefore, have you got participative democracy happening here? Have you got representative democracy? What kind of participation or opportunity did individuals have to be, at least to have the opportunity, the buy-in? And there wasn't anything, in terms of that kind of structure, it wasn't there.
So at this point, have we got a
change? So what we would like you to do in your group context, and this is your big discussion of the day, think of a change within your own context, whether it's a provincial change or a change within your own board, and evaluate it on the basis of the chart. Take those kind of building blocks one at a time, and how do those apply to this particular change?
And the other thing is, as you're doing this, consider this also as a model to help you look at strategic planning for kinds of issues that you want to accomplish. Because if you can look at it in terms of saying, yes, we're confident that we can fill all the cells in this initiative, then you'll be confident that it'll work. Particularly if you've got good engagement processes to help you.
We would like to call this meeting to order. This is our last little bit of debriefing. Hang on a minute, there's something here. This hasn't got a punchline under it, but it's a sort of an unwritten thing. It's parent-teacher interviews. It's like that blame thing. And, okay, so debrief. Where's the thing? Put your deal on you. Turn it on. There you go. Well, have you got that microphone?
Yes, it's down here.
Someone hogging the microphone.
Morris, have you? Yes.
So, okay, I'm looking at these. What did you see as missing? The comment. Just get a little bit of research here. Okay, Fred.
All right.
Pass it on.
Has anybody? This table is going to talk.
They've been picked on all day.
Bernie?
Yeah, we were just going over our implementation of Power School. And although we didn't have that chart, we thought we covered it really quite well. And it moved in very smoothly for our staff, and we were very happy with it. It was nice to now have that on a grid, and we could go through and say, yeah, we did that, we did that.
So it's a source of affirmation, this as well. Yeah? What are we doing well? The appreciative inquiry.
Well, things are going well up in
Far
Wainwright.
side.
Hey? Buffalo Trail. Wainwright, isn't it? Yeah.
Far side. He's engaging them in a small group discussion. Give another one. Down there. There's a hand up down here on the right. Down there. Don't, yeah. You have to bite out the pin before you... Okay.
What we found is that you can have all of those things filled in, all of those cells filled in across the top at the board level, but when it gets handed down into the school level, that a lot of times some of those cells are empty.
Excellent. You have passed this class.
Yes. Yeah. He's graduated. You're all going to graduate today, right? Where's your mortar boards? All right. Who else? How many of your groups had none of the cells filled? Rod?
I'm running for office, so you better take the mic away.
Oh, yeah. Give me that.
Actually, we took two different approaches. We looked at one that we thought we kind of completed, and we said, did we follow that? And it was neat to fill that out. We have another one, and I know most of you people don't understand the jobs with assessments right now. So we went through the assessment process and how it was shared with teachers, and they had all their input. And we didn't get past the vision because the board didn't see the vision. And if we don't get past that, it becomes very difficult to go to the rest. But we have a music program that under previous grants net, it followed all of those and it fit in. So the one that says it works, we understand that it should work elsewhere as well. And we've got a job to go back and use an example that did work, and we've now got to assess why one didn't work.
Good.
It's a very important point there. Yeah. What needs to be dealt with first? We need that vision. And Bill, this sounds like a building, one of the major building blocks.
We have a new table.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're the Robins, by the way.
You're Robins.
We're
Yes,
Robins.
you're the
Yes,
Robins.
we're the Robins. We came up with a change that is just happening to us, so we haven't filled any of the squares in yet. We started talking about the high school flexibility plan and recognizing that we're just like in the first box, so this gives us an idea of how we have to move forward to make sure it's effective, not only at the board level, but also in the schools.
Excellent.
Very good.
Yeah.
And stay in your own nest, Robins, okay? All right.
And no tweeting.
No tweeting. Is anybody else like the mic? Who isn't a candidate? You're a candidate. Put your hand down.
Okay. There's one. Yep. Now, Deanne, we'll let you
So
talk.
we did a hypothetical vision, I guess, because we said, okay, what if we could actually afford to have built-in preparation time for all our teachers, and how we got there. And it was tough to even start with the vision because, I mean, your ultimate vision is success for students, but when you're talking about this change, it's teacher efficacy, I guess, was our vision. But as we moved down the line, we realized that what might work for one teacher in one school is not perhaps what another teacher in another school will work. So anyway, it was a challenge.
Good. Good.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah, great. And so then,
Hold on.
another one. Another.
Yeah, we took a hypothetical too, and then just went through the chart and filled it in for what we could. With half of our board being changed, the vision was to integrate into a very effective board, and went through the steps necessary to do that. And hopefully we have a plan and another topic for our next board meeting agenda.
Thank you very much. So, the integration of board. Now, I'm going to give you this mic. Yeah, but not for political purposes.
Vote for Rick as a vote. That was subliminal.
You got to give him credit.
That was subliminal. I'd seen this model some time ago, and at the time I was a principal in a school. And I found that it was a very useful analytical tool because a particular project that I had underway was showing some not so good signs. And by recognizing the consequences that were beginning to surface, I was able to narrow down on what elements of the process that were missing.
Yeah. Yeah, in policy terms, they call that backward mapping. You know, using this to go back and get things right.
Yeah. Of the shared values of those charged with the responsibility for governance. And that's a very interesting, important point around the culture of your board. And then to what extent do those values over a period of time become shared?
So, good policy, thirdly, then, is driven by subsequent incorporation of those values and belief into the fabric of policy action.
Good policy is explicit in delineating boundaries between the governance and the executive function. And we've talked about that a fair bit. How do you ensure then that there's clarity around the roles and responsibilities of the director and superintendents on one hand and the board on the other?
So they say this demarcation finds expression in how the policy is framed. What needs to be accomplished, which is the ends, and the regulations, the administrative processes that are required to get it done.
And related to the means. And then roles and responsibilities between and among those charged with governing and those charged with administering are always framed in terms of responsibility for ends and means.
Policy,
which we just said.
Yes. Policy which is vague in terms of authority for ends and means is poor policy. I mean, if it's, and that's why you get different interpretations of policy. If it's vague, then there is the chink in the armor that, people, say, well,
structures and processes which allow for promote vagueness are almost always dysfunctional. And it's that clarity, as you were bringing out, your discussions were really focused on those areas, and the ideas that you were coming out with were really informative on that.
And strong, trusting, and respectful relationships between trustees and administration are fundamental to effective policy governance. Reciprocally given. Is that it? Hey,
and, what we'd add generally, and Fred and all, I always add that really at the heart of it all is that teaching, learning function. And it's keeping the eye on that particular ball. Sometimes, we get kind of distracted with our relationships with provincial government and with different initiatives, but it's that whole teaching and learning and elevating, actually, the work of teachers and giving them. I had a great discussion there with Brian around it earlier, but the role of the professional and respecting the role of the professional and providing the space within which our professionals, our employees can work.
So,
effectively. We
want to just finish, like we always do, with a poem. And this one, some of you have heard, and it's not in this particular presentation. But it will be in the next one. All right. If that makes sense to you, you really graduated. This poem is called Teacher, and it's written by a poet whose name is Rabbi Zev Shostak. And he says,
he's Irish.
This.
Oh, sorry, sir.
He says, I am that most fortunate of persons, for I am eternal, Some people live in the world of today. I live in the world of tomorrow. Some find meaning in the temporal and the transient. I find purpose in the enduring and the eternal. For I am charged with that most sacred of missions, to transmit all that our forebears lived for and loved for and died for to the next generation. I span the generations, making the wisdom of the past live now so that the future will have meaning. I make wisdom live. For I am no mere bearer of knowledge. I do not simply teach the mind, I reach the heart. And when I reach the heart, I touch the soul. To those who say 2 generations hence, what shall I be, if but a distant memory, I respond, though the mind fades, memories linger. Though the body fails, the spirit prevails. Though the scroll burns, the letters dance in the air. So that's it. It's a poem about teaching. We're all teachers. And you will be and are teachers at a high level. When we can find time in terms of creating powerful cultures in our schools, we do well to take those sentiments and elevate them and exalt them for those who work tirelessly in the pursuit of making learning opportunities for the children for whom we're responsible.
You are a great group of trustees. You're a model for trustees everywhere. I think the children in Alberta are pretty well off with guys like you in charge. You worked your buns off today, and it was great. And it's just great. It's empowering working with people like you guys. And Fred and I appreciate that. We loved it last June, and we loved it today. And we're going for a pint now. That was great.
What does this R mean? I haven't figured that out yet.
There's an announcement. There's something has to happen. Hang on. You can't do anything yet. Somebody's coming up to talk. Oh, you all right? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, do you want the handheld?
Thank you. We were sitting at our table, kind of taking in the program that we had today, and really did appreciate the poems and the limericks, so we composed a little limerick of our own for...
Oh, geez.
There are 2 brothers in education. Dr. Pat and Dr. Fred. Their musings on governance injected with wit do crazy things to our head. Is that a limerick? The other little thing, on behalf of Medicine Hat 76, we wanted to show our appreciation to the work that Patty has done over her term, and so I brought down a little gift, and who was the first person that I ran into in the hall? It was Patty. Anyway, Patty, on behalf of Medicine Hat 76, we really appreciate the work that you've done and the absolute dedication that you have to not only public education, but children in public education. So we want to say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's so thoughtful. Thank you very much to Medicine Hat. I do appreciate that. And Rick is right, I did see him in the hallway with that, and he said it's Terry's birthday today. And I don't know that I need to even close off for the doctors now that the wonderful limerick is there, but we absolutely do appreciate that it was a wonderful day, lots of knowledge, lots of time to talk and explore some of the things that you chatted about, and certainly some good time for laughter. Now, before the doctors head out for that pint that they talked about, we do have a bit of a job for you to help us with. We would like to celebrate the long and dedicated service of our colleagues with the presentation of our very first Long Service Awards. As our first Vice President calls the name of each member board and recipient of that award, we'd like you to join us at the front of the ballroom, and we'll have some pictures with the doctors. Karen.